You never, ever turn a man. It's off limits. Men can't handle power. They have it already, and look at what they've done with it.
We are talking about the vampire movie Bit. Now, I struggled whether I should review this movie or not, because though this, on the surface of this is going to sound like a Lost Boys style vampire movie, the real underlying message of this one is its social political messages. This is a very political movie in a lot of ways in regards to social politics, and it's obviously going to appeal to a certain audience rather than another. And I was kind of like, should I review this? Because I really don't like to have a political stance on my channel. I like to be very objective in regards to the quality of the film without injecting my personal politics into my channel. And in the same way, I don't like movies that preach one way or the other political messages in my entertainment. That includes YouTube channels. But you can't help but have to talk about the subject with this particular movie. So let me give you a little bit of a brief overview about what this movie is about. This one is directed and written by Brad Michael Elmore in his third feature. And this one stars Nicole Maines. Now, Nicole Maines is a transgender person in real life. And in this movie, they are playing a transgender character called Laurel. The movie also stars Diana Hopper and MC Gainey. So Laurel, as I've mentioned, is a transgender person who moved to LA to move in with the brother. And they are out one night and are approached by a group of female lesbian vampires. It's not clear whether they are all gay, but certainly some in the group are. And ultimately seduce Laurel with the intention of kind of bringing Laurel into the group. The Laurel must decide at that point if the kind of temptation is worth it. There are certain, obviously, moral issues at stake here in regards to having to kill people, etc. And then the story is the relationship between Laurel and the kind of these group of vampires, plus the kind of the family members, friends, all that sort of stuff. We also have this a B plot about a kind of older vampire who may well have a different agenda. Now, agenda is going to be the name of the game here, because that's what the movie is about. And fair play for it to try and make a movie to a very particular audience. But I feel this movie is going to really appeal to some and not to others because of this. Now, before recording my review, I wanted to get the flavour of other reviews to see what it was said. And as I expected, they were polarising, because obviously those who are on the left wing praise the movie for being so progressive, you know, so inclusive of LBG elements, all that sort of stuff. But on the flip side, obviously, we have the more the right wing side of stuff saying they don't want to be preached to, and it's kind of man-hating, etc. So before you watch this movie, you've got to decide where I suppose you lay on the political spectrum, because this movie really makes no bones about it. Well, I said, put a pin in that. I have one issue with this whole thing here. I can't help but really try to come at this in my objectively, but I will say I am going to come in. I'm going to be honest about my own political beliefs here, which is something I don't like to really talk about, to be honest, because it's, for my opinion, I want this channel to really be apolitical. But I suppose if I had to describe myself, I would consider myself somewhat of a centrist, but somewhat right-leaning on certain issues, more so than left. So you might say I am slightly to the right side of the political agenda, but I do feel I can be objective, and I am completely, you know, I'm not going to tell anyone how they should live their lives, shall we say. However, this is really going to depend on your own personal preference, whether you're going to like this movie. But let's talk about, for example, what I think works, first of all, with this movie. Now, there's been many teen vampire movies over the years. Obviously, I would say maybe you could start off with the Lost Boys was the first movie to really have that kind of aesthetic, obviously, in the 80s. And then since then, we've had varying degrees of trying to copy the Lost Boys formula, including its own sequels. And then, of course, we've had the Twilight series, a film series that this movie actually takes jabs at. But I've got to say, this movie to me is the closest one to the original Lost Boys in regards to its outsider attitude. Now, the attitude is very different, and I don't think this movie is trying to be like a Lost Boys movie, but I've seen plenty of movies that do try and never really hit the mark. And I think this one actually is almost, from a very different, obviously, standpoint, it still has that sort of the outsider issues, and I think so. In a way, I actually feel like this is a somewhat of a successor to Lost Boys. Now, I love the Lost Boys, just to let you know, it's one of my favourite movies. And this movie, I'm not saying is like the Lost Boys, but I don't know, it just reminds me of that kind of like an attitude, but obviously for the 2020s. So, I really liked our head vampire, Duke. And she is kind of like, I guess if you're going to use the Lost Boys analogy, played by Diane Hopper, and she's kind of like the Keith Sutherland of this movie. Effortlessly cool, a real kind of badass, and played absolutely deadpan by the actor. And I thought they did a great job making kind of an intriguing kind of character. I did appreciate the fact that the movie tries to have somewhat of a counter argument in the fact that Laurel's brother he's not right wing, but he is he's maybe more centrist and kind of almost as a counterbalance to some of the arguments that maybe the left will have, saying, you know, that essentially that the conversation with Laurel being transgender has essentially sucked out all the air in the room, and he never really gets any kind of attention because it was always about Laurel and obviously what Laurel's character was kind of going through, which I thought was, you know, at least an attempt here to try and have, you know, a kind of a counterbalance to a degree, but it never really gives you a full right-wing kind of counter argument, so to speak. I actually thought there was some fairly decent gore here. The kills and the actual effects actually look quite good, and actually do look relatively bloody here. And it does have obviously it's all set in Los Angeles, and does have this kind of cool neon, sort of dirty underbelly of kind of Los Angeles feel to it. As I thought, you know, you always imagine Los Angeles attracting the kind of like the waifs and strays, and you kind of do get this kind of this grimy kind of feel of the underside of Los Angeles and things like the expiring actors who go there and kind of never make it and stuff like that. The movie's actually quite well paced, I would say. It's very well shot. I actually thought the cinematography was very good here. I actually quite appreciated some of the lesser characters. There's like the original female vampire. I thought was, although she's underused, I actually thought was an interesting kind of character, and I appreciated the Dracula-esque kind of like male vampire that they do have. Although I think he was a little bit miscast. We'll come on to that. Okay, let's talk about what doesn't work. Trying to stay away from the kind of the political stuff for a minute, which we'll just circle back to at the end. I have to say, Nicole Maines, you could have a drinking game here, the amount of times that she rolls her eyes in this movie. My God, it is like every other scene, rolling of the eyes. It's just ridiculous. I actually thought not the best acting performance, if I'm being honest. I don't know. It was obviously a choice, but it just seemed a little bit over the top and came across as a very petulant character, I have to say. So I didn't think it was a particularly great performance or a written character. I feel the director should have picked this up a little bit more. I feel some of the other characters are a little underdeveloped. We focus a lot on Duke and maybe one other of the kind of the vampire group, but there's two or three other ones that really don't get any kind of characterization at all. They're just kind of there. As I've mentioned, I think the male vampire, this Vlago, is miscast. He's meant to be like this beautiful, seductive guy. I don't know. I wasn't really getting that, to be honest with you. And why not just call him Dracula? It's a public domain then. They call him Vlad, but then they pause and wait for them to tell you the surname. Just pull the trigger on it. Pull the trigger on something else, which we're going to come on to. I feel the movie never 100% commits to its own promise. Now, when you read the text of this movie, the story, it will say a transgender character, Laurel, goes to Los Angeles. They never actually say it in the movie. It's implied several times, but they skirt around the issue, and it's obviously they're skirting around the issue. The language that they've used makes it sound like they are not willing to fully commit to out and out saying that. So you almost feel like, do you have the strength of your own convictions? Because it feels like you are not fully committing to this premise that this movie is setting up for itself. That if you're going to lean into it, then lean into it. But if you're not, it's almost like we want to have it a little bit ambiguous, so maybe people won't kind of notice. And I'm thinking, it doesn't feel like you're prepared to commit to the strengths of your own convictions. And on the subject of the political stuff, I feel this movie is deliberately trying to antagonise the right, because these group of kind of vampire women, like I said, they deliberately say we don't turn men because they can't handle the power. All right, and then they'll say things like they tried to go after bloggers and people who are trolls on the internet, and I thought that seems a little bit kind of a direct poke at kind of like the internet's kind of like Twitterverse and things like this, and the kind of like the geek kind of channels that you will see that have a kind of a more of an overt right-wing agenda and stuff like that. It's almost deliberately trying to antagonise these channels, so they will and kind of outlets, so they will talk about it and maybe kind of drum up interest, maybe for the kind of more left-leaning potential viewers, I suppose. So it made me feel like this movie is deliberately trying to be provocative without fully committing to its own agenda. And that could have been more of an interesting idea in a way, because the whole idea being that these vampires don't turn men, yet Laurel is a transgender person, and they obviously turn Laurel, and she kind of like mentions it. And I'm like, it's fine, and it's kind of, I mean, the same thing happened in Supergirl, if I remember rightly. They were like, it made a point of saying that the character is female because of this plot point, for example. But there could have been more that could have been done with that. I feel that would have been an interesting kind of subject. Maybe it was too political of a button to press, maybe. But I why address it in that case? Why kind of even bring it up at all if you're not going to kind of commit to it? So, this, like I said, this is a hard movie to review, but I am going to say, outside of the political stuff, I actually kind of like this movie. I actually thought it was a well-structured movie with some interesting characters, fairly good pace, some great gore, and the attitude of the Lost Boys, but for a modern contemporary audience. Now that to me is quite high praise. It's very different from the Lost Boys in regards to how the structure of the movie is, obviously far more political. But by not trying to ape the Lost Boys directly, they've almost succeeded in creating a modern equivalent that speaks to different people, but still has that outsider attitude, which I thought was actually quite good. So here's the thing with this movie. It so rests on a political belief. I find this movie is going to be hard to recommend to those who are of a certain mind frame politically, because it really isn't just a subplot. It's really such a major part of this movie you have to really, I think, you know, appreciate the point of view, or be so not bothered by it then you don't care either way. But I feel that if you are politically minded, this is going to be a very big contributing factor. But on its own, I actually did enjoy this movie, I will say. So, and I quite liked some of the characters, and I actually will say, trying to park the kind of the political stuff aside, based on its own merit, I think this was actually a relatively good film. So we'll give it a slightly above average mark at 6 out of 10. But it's really going to be dependent. My score is going to be trying to take the political stuff out of it to a degree, but I still feel you have to really decide whether you want to watch or not. So 6 out of 10. This is certainly one of the hardest reviews that I've had to do, because it's like, how much of this political stuff do we need to talk about? And I think with this film particularly, that you have to talk about it quite a lot. So 6 out of 10, have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.